It was time to discuss Blade Runner with my partner. But first, we had to play the theme song.
We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and more human than human is our motto. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were technically poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. This week, we are talking the 1982 film Blade Runner. My name is Chris Logan, and I'm joined, as always, by my replicant co-host, Andrew Williams. All right, you ready for this one, Andrew?
Yes.
Okay, well then let's jump into it. What is your history with this movie, this little sci-fi flick called Blade Runner?
Yeah, this little indie hit, Blade Runner. Not even a hit, this little indie film. We've probably talked about it on this show before. I don't know how deep we've gone into it, but I love Blade Runner. This is one of my favorite movies. I watch it probably... I don't watch it a lot. I probably watch it like once a year. I do that annual, it's time to watch Blade Runner.
I would say that's a lot, by the way. I mean,
okay.
Once a year. How many movies do you watch once every single year?
There's a few movies that I'll watch several times a year, but
okay. Well, I still think it's a lot. An annual viewing, that's pretty good.
Anyway, I love this movie. There are a variety of different versions of this. Obviously, it has been a while since I've seen the theatrical. So what I was interested most in coming back to this was the idea that, I've not seen this version in a long time, and was excited to check that out. But I love this movie. I was so excited when the sequel came out. It's one of those things that you kind of... It's one of those things that, you hear they're making a Blade Runner sequel, and you're kind of like... we weren't quite as, jaded, I think, with, kind of dredging up a property and doing a sequel now as we were at the time. And I think when they announced, Denis Villeneuve was going to direct it and stuff like that, that got me super excited. I remember when it came out, I was living in Maryland when Blade Runner 2049 came out, and I drove to the only theater I could find within a 50-mile radius that had the double feature that I think AMC or Cinemark was doing, where it was Blade Runner, the final cut, and then the new Blade Runner 2049 back to back.
That's pretty cool.
And it was very cool. And yeah, I remember because the mall, it was right by a mall called the King of Prussia Mall. And I'll never forget that name just because the King of Prussia seems like such a weird name for anything besides the King of Prussia. And even then it's still a little questionable. But I was a mall right next to it, and so I remember going to that mall and then going over to the theater, and I was like, this is that weird thing where I was living in Maryland, working in Delaware, and then drove to Pennsylvania, and then came back to Maryland and was like, you can do this in 45 minutes. You can go through multiple states at once. Texas has led me to believe that's not possible. So that was part of my awakening that other places are not as so spread apart as Texas is. But
Texas definitely skews, my view on what a state is. Because I live in Houston. I've driven to El Paso many times in my life because I have family out there.
12 hours, give or take?
12 plus. It depends on how, fast and furious you can drive without resting. 12, 13 hours. And then we took a family trip to Florida, 3 states away. It was a shorter drive. And I was like, Texas is pretty big, isn't it?
You got 12 plus. My sister used to go to college in New Mexico, Albuquerque, Santa Fe. And once I had to go help my dad pick her up and drive her back before she had her own car. And that's like a 15-hour drive, and like 12 and a half of it is in Texas.
Yeah.
Like, if you go Houston to Denver, it's like a 16-hour drive. 13 of it is in the state of Texas. Like, once you're out of Texas, you're in the home stretch. Like, even New Orleans, which is the other way, is still like, what, 5-6 hours from Houston? It's still
that's not bad.
sizable. Yeah, that's not bad. 6 hours is not bad.
Yeah.
And then, again, like once you get out of Texas, you can hit, Louisiana, all along the coast there pretty quick. But so, yeah, when I was doing that up there, I was super confused because King of Prussia is like in Pennsylvania somewhere. And so I was like, this is wild. But all that is to say, I love Blade Runner. I'm a huge fan of Blade Runner. Apparently, I've identified some gaps in my physical collection. Apparently, I don't have these. I have a Blu-ray of Blade Runner, but I do not have 4Ks of either. But I have to fix that. But was super excited to come back into this for our Technically month. Because it even ignoring the technically part of this was not a financial hit, really, by any means. We'll talk about that more in a second. But
it took a long time to grow a legacy, for sure.
Yeah.
But my history with this movie is a bit different. I think I've said on this podcast before, especially leading up to this episode, like, this movie never really clicked with me. So the first time I watched it, I was in college. I mean, that's like prime Discover Blade Runner age, right? That's prime film snob territory. That's like 1000%. And on top of that, I was a big fan of Philip K. Dick and a lot of his adapted work. By then, I think I had seen A Scanner Darkly, Minority Report. I read Minority Report, and some other work. And I remember this movie was actually assigned to me by my English professor. Well, not me, the whole class, where you had to watch it and do a project on it. And it was my first time jumping into it. I'm like, well, this is right up my alley. I don't know why I haven't seen it so far. I like Philip K. Dick. And one thing his work is always, not always known for, but a lot of his best work is known for, is this this sort of ambiguous nature where you can never quite settle on what is true about various aspects of his work. It kind of differs, but what's real, what's human, kind of challenging those notions and never really landing on a concrete answer, but giving you a lot to chew on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I knew about Blade Runner going into it, other than that it was like a seminal film in the sci-fi genre, what I had always heard was there's this mystery at the center on whether or not Deckard is a replicant. And so that was on my mind going into watching this movie. And this was 2007, and I rented the DVD from a Hollywood Video.
Oh,
I say that
man,
because I'm trying to remember which version I watched. It had to be theatrical, I'm pretty sure. Like, I don't think Final Cut had been done yet. Director's Cut was out there.
If Final Cut was out, it had just come out. So, because Final Cut comes out in 2007. It does come out that year, but I think it's late in the year. I think it's like December that it gets released on physical media. So
okay, yeah, I definitely watched the theatrical then, and I did not immediately love this movie. I was not vibing with it, and this mystery I've been built up for me is like non-existent. I'm like, what are you people forcing out of this film to try to come up with this theory about Deckard being a replicant? Now, I'm sure we'll talk about some other versions of this movie as we've gone through the podcast, and there's some credence to it that pops up later, but the version I watched, it's not there. The version we're talking about today, theatrical, I'm sorry, there's nothing there to support this. But what I failed to see then, and what I've maybe come around to now, maybe I like this movie a lot more now than I did in 2007, is that mystery is not the appeal of this movie.
no,
there's a lot of appeals to this movie, like the set, the visuals. There's a lot going on in the story. There is some moral ambiguity to dive into. There's a lot happening that I was just not picking up on back then. I did see the Final Cut in preparation for Blade Runner 2049 because I did want to check that out. I watched Final Cut, and I kind of watched it as like homework, like I should refresh myself and kind of know what's going on story wise, so I understand how Harrison Ford fits into the new one. And I watched it, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, that movie's better than I remember. Let's go watch 2049. And I love 2049, by the way. Possibly the best looking film I've ever seen, which is it's shot on digital. So if you ever need like an argument on digital looking good, like I recommend 2049. It's just visually astounding. But still had no real love for Blade Runner. And so I was excited to revisit it for this month, our technically month, and maybe finally click as to why this movie has the legacy and reputation that it does. I found a lot to like, and we are going to be talking about it. But first, we got to set the stage a little bit for this movie's original release. It comes out June 25th, 1982. It's made on a budget of $30 million, not a small budget in 1982. At the box office, it only brings in $41.8 million. So that's a flop at the box office. Critically, it's not panned as hard as some of the other movies we're talking about. Like The Thing last week, straight up panned critically upon release. That eventually flops. This movie has its defenders from day one. Those defenders only grow over time as the movie is revised and quote unquote fixed and more aligned with Ridley Scott's vision. But, I dug into some historical reviews. There is certainly some negatives people bring up, but Roger Ebert, for example, gives it a thumbs up and 3 stars upon release, which is solid. It's not all praise. In fact, he ends his review like this. He says, the movie's weakness, however, is that it allows the special effects technology to overwhelm its story. Ford is tough and low-key in the central role, and Rutger and Sean Young are effective as 2 of the replicants, but the movie isn't really interested in these people or creatures. The obligatory love affair is pro forma, the villains are standard issue, and the climax is yet one more of those cliffhangers, with Ford dangling over an abyss by his fingertips. The movie has the same trouble as the replicants. Instead of flesh and blood, its dreams are made of mechanical men. Andrew, I'm glad that he liked the movie. I'm a little flabbergasted by this final take here because I feel like
that doesn't sound like he liked it at all.
It doesn't sound like he liked it, but it seems like he's like, oh, the special effects are great, but they overpower the story. And like the movie's story and its characters, I feel like is what works, what gives the movie its legacy.
Absolutely.
I mean, the visuals are great. We'll talk about them, but like what's buried underneath is what people keep going back to, what people like write essays about and study on this movie. So it's
like the base level, the debate is Deckard a replicant. It's got nothing to do with the special effects, like absolutely nothing. And I do want to clarify here: the original release of Blade Runner only makes like $27.5 million of that box office.
Oh, so that 41 is like re-releases.
That 41 includes the fight. There was a release in '93 that actually did really, really well. Box Office Mojo very nicely breaks this all down. It actually made $4.7 million in that re-release in the '90s, and then made another $2.2 million when they released the final cut in 2007. And then there's been a couple of other sparse releases here and there. Apparently, it did really well overseas in 2018, but otherwise, yeah. So that original box office though is even
pretty
less.
rough.
It is below the budget of $30 million, and even with all of those re-releases, you are still not looking at a financial success. You are looking at a movie that almost assuredly did not even cover its marketing, and did not go into the black. Almost assuredly, people get a little confused on how movie money works. And to be fair, we all do, because there's a reason it's called Hollywood math. Because there's always a budget listed, and it's deceptive. We talked about this before, because that's only the budget to make the film, usually. Sometimes the budget does include all the marketing and stuff. Usually it doesn't, because it's considered a separate cost by the studio. This is the film. The film is done. Now we got to market it. That's a separate thing. So a movie considering profitable is usually twice its budget, gets it even, especially when you consider like the theater takes and things like that. They have to split that money. And so Blade Runner falls in way below every single possible metric that you could use to define the movie as a success as far as finances go.
And I should say,
yeah.
because I didn't, it sits at 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. We always like to look at that, but there is not really a convenient way to parse out revisits or final cut reviews. So it's very positive, but again, looking at the time of its release, it's a lot more hit or miss. Rotten Tomatoes is a popular review aggregation website for film and television.
Yeah, at the time, the reactions were extremely mixed. I think that's the thing. Like it's 88% Rotten Tomatoes, and it even says misunderstood when it first hit theaters. I think that's the first line of like Rotten Tomatoes like consensus review is that it just people didn't get it or people didn't understand, and that's I hate when people do things like that. It's like you just didn't understand Blade Runner. It's like no, it's pretty straightforward. For all the stuff that the movie gets, the plot of this movie largely is extremely straightforward. But that was a common criticism, though, that the effects were kind of overpowering the plot. It wasn't really like a straight action film, like it was kind of marketed as. This movie is kind of a slow burn. There's obviously bursts of action kind of sparse throughout that kind of builds to even a final fight that's still a largely cat and mouse type chase.
Right.
There's not really any like big fight. The one moment where Deckard actually fights Batty, he gets his hand broken. Like it's not, there's no, they're not fighting each other on the same level. Which, if he were a replicant, anyway, but
hashtag PP. I hate this. We're gonna talk about it.
We will.
I hate that argument.
I really do. Anyway, but the point being that like it's basically there was a lot of people that I think didn't really vibe with what the movie was doing. They thought the effects were great, but they were like, cool. You forgot to do anything else. They didn't really think it was marketed very well, which is something that's definitely never happened before. Somebody even described it as like science fiction porn, like just like it was definitely mixed at the time, and I think it was not a stretch for us to include it here, especially when you throw in the box office receipts as well. This audience just wasn't there at the time. They obviously appear now, and pretty much any major work of science fiction almost exclusively credits Blade Runner as a huge influence. So this movie got its flowers eventually, but it just took time.
Taking a look at the creative team, the screenplay is written by Hampton Fancher and David Peoples. Now, Fancher is a sci-fi writer through and through. Plenty of credits up and down his career, both TV and movies. And he does come back to help write Blade Runner 2049. Peoples, on the other hand, has much more variety, I would say, as far as genre in his filmography. Goes on to help write Unforgiven and does revisit sci-fi with the classic film 12 Monkeys.
That he co-wrote with his wife, Janet. 12 Monkeys, that is.
Relationship goals, am I right?
No kidding. Just let's team up and write one of the weirdest time travel sci-fi movies of all time. But Hampton Fancher, and for whatever it's worth, Hampton Fancher said he did not write Deckard as a replicant. Because it's not going to go away, Chris, so I'm just going to bring it all up all the time. He had a bit of a tumultuous relationship with Ridley Scott. He was working on the film and writing it before Ridley Scott came on board. So David Peoples is definitely brought in after Ridley's there to kind of more firm things up in the direction Ridley Scott was wanting to go. But Hampton Fancher did work on that movie for a significant period of time. And they had clashed over some of the ideas and concepts in the movie. He was also very slow with his rewriting process, so there was definitely some tension there. But he's largely seen as the main architect of the film. As such, he was brought back to co-write the new one with Michael Green. He also co-wrote the prequel films they put out there, the kind of little snippets like the one focused on Batista and the ones with that. So he did a lot of work on this, and he definitely was pretty proud of what he contributed to this.
And of course, the film is directed by Ridley Scott.
Excuse you, Sir Ridley Scott.
Oh, pardon me. Of course, a legend of cinema. So there's not much new things we can say about him, but it is interesting to look at where this movie falls in his filmography, because he only has 2 movies under his belt before this. The Duelists as his debut, and then he follows that up with Alien. So the man has already made like a seminal work of sci-fi, and then goes right into Blade Runner, which Alien is, instantly gets its legacy, and Blade Runner has to grow into it. But what a back-to-back combo. But despite all this heavy sci-fi early in his filmography, Ridley Scott has a crazy, varied filmography, which it's almost underrated how many different genres this man can work in. We've talked, we've praised Steven Spielberg for something similar, but I would say, I don't know, Ridley Scott maybe even more so, because he makes the type of genre film that are like King of the Mountain in that genre and can still switch it up. Whereas I think Steven Spielberg has some common elements amongst all his movies. But I mean, we're comparing 2 of the greatest directors of all time. It's not really, no one's going to look bad in this. But just to rattle off a few of them, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, Matchstick Men, which I didn't realize he directed until I was looking into this. I love that movie. Very underrated Nicolas Cage performance. Of course, goes back to the Alien franchise with Prometheus, The Martian. I mean, we're all over the place here. It's incredible.
And I don't know if you guys know this, The Martian is excellent.
Very good.
It is unbelievably good. I always like I'll throw it on just because I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good little thing just to have some noise on, and then I'm almost always like 5 minutes in, I'm just sucked back in, and I'm like, well, the next 2.5 hours are covered. And it's like, that's not even talking about some of like the smaller stuff, like he did, American Gangster, which was like a big movie for Denzel, and even Kingdom of Heaven, another movie that's probably the only one you could ever argue the director's cut changes a poor film to a great film. It's still one of the only ones I actually think of that actually does that. And just everything. Not even Legend. He follows up Blade Runner with Legend. He goes straight from one of the hard sci-fi movies into a hard dark fantasy movie. And it's just, like you said, there's no limit to what he's capable of doing, where he can go. They're not all hits. I won't pretend they are. He's got some strange ones in there. He's got a Robin Hood movie he did in there, which is a little strange, with Russell Crowe. He's got Gladiator 2 coming, which I don't really know what we're doing with Gladiator 2. But
I don't know.
We're about to find out, I guess. Just did his Napoleon movie last year. So he's still out there doing his thing. And if I guess I needed any reassurance, I think he was 41 when Alien was released. So I got some time.
Got time, Andrew. Also, shares a birthday with yours truly, born on November 30th. Add that to the list. I think we've come across 3 or 4 of these, of course, this podcast. Pretty crazy. And of course, we're talking about the creative team. We have to talk about Philip K. Dick, who I mentioned earlier. This is based on his story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Which I love that title. I understand why they didn't use it for the movie, but what a cool title for a book. Somehow, during all my Philip K. Dick deep dives, I never actually read this. I need to go read it. I even they did the comic adaptation. I don't know if it was Boom Studios, maybe. I can't remember who did it, but they turned it into a graphic novel using the actual text from the book and just adding illustrations, which was a really cool idea. I bought all the single issues as they came out. I haven't read it. I need to go back and read it, but
I think I might have done the same thing. Like, I think I bought them all and then never read them.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is great. It is a classic. I mean, it's published in 1968. It is.
I saw you looking back at your bookshelves. Do you have a copy of it somewhere back there, Andrew? Is that what you're
Probably. It's buried in all this other crap. Yeah, there it is. Dude, I have several Philip K. Dick books. And I have because he's got all. Cause, you think about the stuff that he's done that's been turned into just movies. You've got Total Recall, based off of We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. You've got Blade Runner, based off To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. Also, great titles like We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. I have a Scanner Darkly back there. Man in the High Castle turned into the Amazon show that I think I never saw the end of it, so I don't know how far off book it has to go to keep being a show. But Paycheck was another big one. I know they made a movie out of it, but it's a big story. And just classic upon classic. And so it's a great story. It's a great book. I love it a lot. Deckard passes the Voight Comp test in the book, folks. So let it go. Anyway, I do, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Philip K. Dick. I have many of his books. And there's so many more. Like there's so many books in there too that I'm actually kind of shocked that we've never really gone back and done more with. Whether it's, Ubik, Valus, any of those. There's tons of stuff you could do with that, and tons of room for that I think you could do more. But hey, Hollywood. I hated I said that.
They'll get around to it.
They will. They did publish some sequel novels as well that were probably all rendered, undone by the future films. But that original, it's classic. If you haven't read it, folks, I highly suggest it.
Well, Andrew, I think it's time that we jump into this film, talk about all the positives, everything we like about the theatrical cut of Blade Runner. You ready?
Yes.
Before we discussed any specifics, I had to give an overview of what happens in the movie. Richard Deckard is a former Blade Runner who was brought back to continue his work of hunting down and retiring illegal replicants, androids that look identical to humans. 4 of the latest Nexus 6 models have arrived on Earth illegally, and as Deckard begins his mission, a 5th Nexus 6 is hard to say.
Yes, it is.
5th Nexus 6 named Rachel flees the company that created her, and Deckard is tasked with adding her to the list as well. Deckard takes pity on Rachel, who just discovered she was not human, and eventually falls for her. Nevertheless, he carries out his mission of retiring the fugitive replicants, only to have his own life spared by his final bounty, the powerful Roy Batty. Yep, that about covers it. As you said earlier, Andrew, the actual story here is pretty straightforward. He's a bounty hunter, he's given these bounties, and he carries out his mission.
I mean, he's not really a bounty hunter. I mean, he's a cop that's designed to get these things. But
the voiceover narration says he's a killer or maybe an assassin.
Well, yes, because of what he's doing, but he's still technically a police officer.
Is he? So he's retired at the beginning of this movie, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
when they bring him back, do they make him a cop again, or are they hiring him as a third party?
Either or. I mean, really, because when people ask him for identification, he tells them he's a Blade Runner with his code and everything.
That's true. You know what, Andrew? All right, fair enough. He's not getting a bounty, but bounty hunters.
I love where I can't remember what's it's the last time he gets identified. It's right before the final confrontation with Batty. The cop asks him who he is. He's about to get arrested, and he identifies who he is, and he's like, all right. And then the cop's driving off, and he's like, "Have a better day." And I'm like, "What?" Wait, what?
Dude, that stood out to me too. Yeah.
I was
Have a
like, that's
better
what I'm
one.
just gonna start telling. That's what I'm gonna start telling people now. Have a better one.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but yeah. So like, he gets asked to identify himself multiple times. He has a badge. He shows it.
Okay.
God, Chris, didn't you even watch the movie?
Yeah. We're gonna
At
talk
this
about
point,
this
I was
movie.
questioning if Chris had actually watched this movie.
Hey, that's my joke. We're going to talk about this movie. We're going to talk about this version of the movie, voiceover narration and all, and we're diving into the positives. But before we get to all that, we got to talk about the cast, starting with the high point, best performance of the film. Because every episode we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who's getting your Mark Strong Award for Blade Runner?
I think I have to go back to the Andrew classic. I have to go Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty, our would-be antagonist of this film. He is violent, yet he is thoughtful. He has these kind of questions and this very kind of interesting morality that he sits with. Philip K. Dick was a huge fan of Batty, of Rutger Hauer being cast as Batty and his performance. He was quite the fan of that, and it shows. The whole ending speech that he gives, apparently Hauer kind of rewrote that himself, kind of getting all those lines right and creating that kind of sense. And just really the thing that he goes through in this story, I think, is very interesting. Rutger Hauer brings this immense... What would you say, Chris?
Gravitas.
Yeah, that. To everything. And
Man,
to...
it's been a while since we had a good gravitas.
Had to get one in there. Because if there's one person in this movie bringing it, it's him for sure.
Totally.
And it's just a fantastic performance. The kind of desperation that starts to slowly eke into the character throughout the course of the film, kind of culminating in that final scene where he is kind of realizing the end is coming. And like you see him kind of breaking down in real time. It's just great. It's fantastic. The movie is lesser without Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty. It's such an iconic performance that I can't imagine somebody else playing this part. I think it's that kind of thing. So for me, no question, Rutger Hauer, Mark Strong winner.
I mean, obviously, excellent pick. His final speech is the most famous part about this movie. It is regarded as just an all-time cinematic moment, and for good reason. And as good as that writing is, it is his performance that brings it to life. And as you said, he even had a hand in sort of reshaping and rewriting some of the words, and it just comes out perfect. I love this character. I mean, I guess traditionally this is our villain of the movie. He's fighting our hero and everything, but there's so many layers to this character that are revealed over the course of the movie, because he's presented to us just, as a fugitive, as a violent person, just concerned with living longer. But by the end, we'll talk about it, I guess, when we get to that scene, but there's just so much to this character. You got to credit Rutger Hauer for bringing all those layers to life. A man that, in his own words, never took a role for money. And you look at his filmography, there's not a lot that I recognize up and down. Not because he didn't work. I mean, the dude worked constantly his entire life, did pass away in 2019, RAP. But just, cared about the art and the craft and the performance. And so to have someone with that motivation and that caliber of talent as your quote-unquote villain in a sci-fi movie, it is so much to elevate this film. Just the perfect casting for this character. And I will say, also getting my Mark Strong Award. I was really debating between two people. I mean, yeah, officially he's getting my Mark Strong Award, but to me this movie has a Mark Strong Award winner in the first half and one for the second half. He's definitely the Mark Strong Award in the second half where he gets all his famous scenes, but it's so powerful. I've got to give him the Mark Strong Award just overall. It's I don't think anybody's gonna be surprised by our choice here, Andrew.
No, not at all.
Now, this movie stars Harrison Ford, one of the biggest movie stars of all time, and he plays Deckard. He plays our main character here. Not getting my Mark Strong Award, not because it's a bad performance. He's obviously very good at what he does. But if we are specifically talking about the theatrical, that means we have to consider the infamous voiceover that pops in throughout the movie. Hashtag PP, it's not good. Like, I feel fine saying that because we're about to praise the hell out of this movie and it's an all-time classic, but my God, not only is the actual information being relayed not necessary to any competent viewer of film, but his delivery is so not in line with the tone of the film and his character on screen that it is legitimately comical every time it pops up. And I know, hashtag PP, don't worry, we're getting there. But my God, the voiceover is insane. And you know what? You've got to at least put some of that blame, if you will, on Harrison Ford. So, but even Final Cut, even other versions that don't have it, Rutger Hauer's getting the Mark Strong Award for the strength of his performance. Harrison Ford is he's just like a good, steady hand at the center of this film. But the most interesting things the movie is doing are happening around him. He's not the agent of them. He's sort of just our surrogate to move us along throughout this story. Although I do like his romance with the character of Rachel, but just not, you're in the movie with Rutger Hauer giving his magnum opus. You're not going to win the Mark Strong Award. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Harrison Ford it feels backhanded to say he's doing exactly what he needs to do, but he is. He is the perfect kind of cipher for the plot of this film. And maybe that's why people attach the debate to it, because it inherently, I think, makes the character more interesting than he otherwise might be. Because we don't know much about Deckard, which is another reason people try to imply that he's a replicant.
I disagree. I get what you're saying, but the interesting thing is a human falling in love with a replicant. That's what makes the story interesting, especially a human whose job it is to kill these things. That is, if he's also a replicant, it lessens everything else in this movie. I will die on this hill. I
would agree. My stance is even simpler as far as the whole debate goes, and it's that I don't care. I probably line up with what Harrison Ford largely thinks about it at this point. Harrison Ford has said that he and Ridley Scott do not agree on that debate. Ridley Scott has kind of insisted that he always intended for Deckard to be a replicant. He's kind of implied that it is. There's that one scene where you sort of see that reflection in his eyes, like all the replicants have, and everyone's like, see? And I'm like, yes, but it's not there other times. So if he were a replicant, it would be there all the time, and it's not.
Also, I'm glad you brought that up, Andrew, because baked into the premise of this movie is that it is difficult to tell the difference between a replicant and a human. It takes, extensive testing. But from a viewer's perspective, you're like, oh, well, the replicants have these brown squares in their eyes. But to me, that's more like, I don't know, artistic license. I don't think in the world of Blade Runner, replicants have distinctive eyes, if that makes sense. Because then it...
Otherwise, it would be easy to tell who they were.
Exactly.
You wouldn't need a test. But there's visual cues they give the audience to easily show you what they are. And it would be odd to give them to everybody else and then not the guy that everybody says might be a replicant. Especially when he would hypothetically not be the... I don't know. It really doesn't matter. My stance on the whole thing is that it doesn't matter. And I actually very much love that 2049 went out of its way to not answer this question. The plot of 2049 has Deckard in it, but him being a replicant or not is not important to the story that's happening, so they don't even touch it. And I love that movie for it so much, because there was all these jokes going in that, like, you know, age-old film debate set to end after 40 years or something like that. It was like all these kind of satire headlines about how we were finally going to have an answer to the question. And I was like, ha, suck it. But anyway, Harrison Ford's doing a good job here. But like you said, he's kind of just doing, he's perfect for what he needs to do. And he's playing kind of Harrison Ford in a slightly futuristic world where he's getting beat up by robots a lot. And it's he's perfect for it.
This is going to sound backhanded a little bit to Harrison Ford, but I don't think he's going to be offended by anything I say on this podcast. I don't think of Harrison Ford, first and foremost, as like a great actor. He's not bad at all. I think of him as a great movie star. He is about presence more than anything to me. Like, when I think of great Harrison Ford, like, I don't think of like tearful, emotional moments on screen. I think about bravado and presence and just this.
You think of Indiana Jones, like, you think of stuff like that.
Well, I don't, because I'm not a big fan of those movies. I think I'm more Han Solo and Blade Runner, I guess. But just in general, even like his dramas, What Lies Beneath, or whatever, like, I just think of his presence more than his acting ability. Not that it's not there and not good, but I think that's what he brings to it. And I think the fact that we know he's kind of a grouchy old man, like his entire career, he starts his career late compared to most people. He was like
grouchy old man his entire career. Oh.
Yes. And the fact that I don't ever get the impression that he himself is a huge fan of sci-fi cinema, even though he probably is, because he's made several of them. He doesn't give that impression. I think it's funny that some of his most famous roles are Star Wars and Blade Runner. But you think about the characters that he plays there, like in Star Wars, he's the grouchy guy that doesn't give a crap about the Force or the big story. And in Blade Runner, he's like killing the robots. Like he lives in this grimy sci-fi world, working in the slums and not in awe of the technology around him. And so I think he brings the right energy to those roles, because, like, I feel like in real life, he doesn't have much. It doesn't appeal to him too much, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I don't know that I agree completely, but it does work. In this movie especially, I think it does. Just the idea that he's kind of, I like that idea of character. Well, because it makes the world feel lived in. Because if you have these characters kind of be in awe of the things that are around them, it makes it seem like it's not their world. But because if it were their world, they wouldn't really be like insanely awed by everything they see, because everything would have built to that. Like, you know, if somebody from the 50s came to now, there are probably things that would put them in awe. But for us, we don't have that, because this is just how it is for us. We've never had the experience. Like, we haven't experienced a little bit, because, like, I largely do remember the pre-internet age. Right. Like, so I actually do have that moment where I saw like a seismic shift, whereas my grandmother's seen like 18 seismic shifts. She's the one I should ask that question to. But by doing that with Deckard here, it just adds to his even kind of more sense of kind of being jaded at everything that he's seen around him. And this is a character that's so interesting, because every facet of this character has been analyzed to death by people trying to find an answer to whether or not he's a replicant. When to me, it just doesn't matter. Now, for your point, when you're saying that the story becomes immensely more interesting if he's not, I agree with that largely. I think the movie is far more interesting. And that's part of what I do like about 2049. The caveat of that movie is not changed regardless of whether he's a replicant or not, because the whole, conceit of Blade Runner 2049 is the idea of replicants reproducing. And it doesn't matter if Deckard's a human or a replicant. A replicant is still the one birthing a child. So I love that they found that story that makes that part of it irrelevant, because let's just move on, people. It doesn't matter.
And that brings me to my other contender for Mark Strong Award. And through much of this movie, I thought this is where I was going to be going, but Rutger Hauer is just undeniable at the end of the day, but I am so impressed by Sean Young as Rachel, the replicant that doesn't know she's a replicant, learns that over the course of this movie, and falls in love with Deckard. I think it is such a fine line to walk. The casting of the replicants up and down this movie is very good because the actors that they pick all have a just almost uncanny feeling to them, presence to them, look to them, where like, yeah, they're passable. Obviously, they look human. They're passable as human, but there's something there. And Rachel has a bit of that, but is obviously warmer, softer, much more human because she herself believes she's human. And as we learn, she was given false memories, which gives her just greater emotional depth than other replicants. It was much, much, much harder for Deckard to determine she was a replicant. Great story. And I love that we're first introduced to her, she's in like the corporate office and she has this iconic hairdo. And then after learning the truth, at some point she pulls her hair down and just looks much softer and much more human-like, even though she found out she is a replicant. But she is now living life more like a human, like away from the business. It's very interesting. And Sean Young, she's just so good. She reminds me a bit of like Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, where like obviously objectively very attractive women, but visually they're just a little bit different than like classic Hollywood beauty. And I think that is like a weapon they use to their advantage in both of those roles. I can't really say enough about how good she is. The reason Rutger Hauer is getting the Mark Strong Award is because, again, greatest performance of his career. It's amazing. Just undeniable. But otherwise, I would definitely be going Sean Young, who I did not realize until researching for this episode, plays Einhorn in
You
Ace
didn't
Ventura.
know that?
I did not know that.
Oh, no. Oh, man. Oh, God.
Another great performance,
Oh.
but obviously
Oh, no.
hasn't
No.
aged too
Oh,
well. But
dude. Saying that movie hasn't aged too well is being too nice to what that movie is about. That movie has aged like milk. It has curdled. The milk has gone bad, Chris. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, I know Ace Ventura was that like huge, like monumental thing growing up for us because Jim Carrey was everything.
yeah.
But my God, has that movie aged absolutely terribly. And then I had a friend that was like, yeah, that's why I've always preferred the second one. And I'm like, oh yeah, all that indigenous stuff I'm sure has also aged super well. Like, guys, just watch Liar Liar and watch Dumb and Dumber.
Dude, Liar Liar is so good. That's a legit great
Liar
movie.
Liar is so good. Dumb and Dumber is extremely funny. But oh my God, that's so somebody's like, I was hoping we were going to avoid that, but
Well,
you
like
had
it's
to go
nothing.
there.
Like it's not on her. Like
It's
what
not.
happened
It's
to that
certainly
movie,
not.
and it's still a good performance.
Certainly
But
not. She was very good as the villain in that movie, essentially. But woof.
one
Oh,
last
man.
fun fact here, Andrew. I don't know if we have said on this podcast, friend of the show, my wife, if we've ever acknowledged her given name, but her name is Rachel, Rachael. She is named for Sean Young's character in this film.
That is fun.
Fun fact.
That is an extremely fun fact. She was also in David Lynch's Dune. Sean Young, not your wife. But where she played Zendaya's character from the new movies. So if you want to see that heck of a thing,
Friend of the show, my
check
wife
out
is
Dune.
actually in Villanueva's Dune. Funny enough.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. That makes it all full circle. But anyway, no, Sean Young is great. You went on a very, very long speech about Sean Young there.
strong words coming from the guy who talked about Kyle MacLachlan for 25 minutes in the Flintstones movie episode.
It's unfortunate, but she essentially sits out the entire like latter half / third of this movie. Like He literally comes back to his apartment and she's like even under a blanket. Like she's not even like visible. Like I was like, best not to think about that too much, I'm sure. But she's great here. Not like I said, not doing a whole lot these days, but I think it's a great performance here. It is adding those shades of gray to the replicants and showing she's proof that there is an evolution in them. Because, you know, Deckard says it takes 20, 30 questions for the Voight comp test to essentially identify a replicant, and he gave her like over 100 questions. That's how in-depth it's becoming. And that stuff's cool. It builds out the world, it builds out this technology, and kind of starts asking the question, what is humanity after a certain point? Best not to think about it too much. But anyway, moving on.
Edward James Olmos plays Gaff, another Blade Runner that sort of has a mysterious role in this movie because for whatever reason, he's not the one hunting down these Blade Runners. He's kind of keeping an eye on Deckard. They work together, but then he just has this mysterious nature right down to like the design of this character. And I could be wrong about this, but he at one point Deckard talks about the street talk that people talk. It's a mix of different languages, Japanese and Spanish, and sort of, in the future cultures have just really become a melting pot and birthed this whole new language. I feel like even the character of Gaff is not meant to be like any one specific race, even though Edward James Olmos we think of as Hispanic first and foremost, of course, because of who he is and the roles he plays. But I feel like there's influence from different cultures on the design of this character, and he himself is like a mix of cultures true to the world of this movie. It gives him this ambiguous, mysterious nature, which feeds into, of course, the actions of this character at the end of the movie by letting Rachel live. And then, if you want to subscribe to the Deckard is a replicant himself, future versions of this movie imply that this character knows that. So yeah, a very mysterious figure, but played by the wonderful Edward James Olmos.
Yeah, he's an odd character. Also, he is 35 in this movie, if you all want to feel like you're never going to achieve anything as an adult. But yeah, the character is very interesting. Obviously there's some stuff not being said. He's one of the only other legacy characters that returns for 2049. I believe it is only him and Harrison Ford. Sean Young, I guess, sort of to a degree. But still folding his origami. So still doing exactly being mysterious and being strange. That's what Gaff is. So yeah. What more can you say?
A long time ago, Andrew, I think I was watching Stand and Deliver, starring Edward James Olmos, and my dad made this offhand comment that Edward James Olmos, he's great, and he's Selena's dad. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I thought he was talking about the man Edward James Olmos is in real life, Selena's dad. I was like, oh, interesting, yeah, like a famous daughter. He's talking about the movie, of course, but I didn't realize that
he was
years later. That's what that comment meant. So I used to think he was actually Selena's dad. Moving on, let's talk about some more replicants, Andrew, like Daryl Hannah, who plays Pris. My first note says she's only 63 now, today. Like all these people we're talking about, like in their 80s. Ridley Scott's like 85. Only 63. She was very young at the time.
22.
This movie. Out. Crazy. And again, I'm going to go back to the great casting of these replicants because they have this like uncanny feeling to them. Like Daryl Hannah has an interesting look. Her character furthers that by painting her face and her insane gymnastics. It gives me a lot of like Harley Quinn vibes when she starts flipping around and stuff, but just so weird. Her character, obviously very manipulative, as we'll talk about, to the character of J.F. Sebastian. But great. I love it. I mean, it's just so much of this movie is just is mood and atmosphere, and they literally use like her face to set some of it. Like as Deckard is infiltrating this building, we'll just cut to a shot, like a close up of her turning suddenly or opening her eyes. That really serves no purpose other than just eerie nature of these replicants at this point in time. So she does a lot for like the feel and atmosphere of this movie. Daryl Hannah, what a presence.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Obviously a legendary career at this point, all sorts of things, whether, you've got the Tom Hanks classic splash not long after this, even her turns in Kill Bill, just a little bit of everything all over the place, and just a fantastic career. But yeah, she adds so much to this movie, and I don't think it should be understated whatsoever that this character is a big part of this replicant subplot. Obviously has a functional role within the narrative as well. But it is fantastic, and she adds, like you said, this sense of just slightly off, and the way she kind of like the look she adopts for the latter half of this film with like the white makeup with the black eyes. It's just stunning. It's striking. It stands out. Like you said, they use her features and her appearance to kind of be this kind of quick reference point. Like you said, they kind of frame things around it, and it all works extremely well. And just, with the stuff she's doing, the acrobatics, like you said, Harley Quinn seems like a strange thing to compare it to, but in a way it feels pretty apt. There's a weird alternate universe where Rutger Hauer and her were Joker and Harley Quinn. But I'd watch it. Just saying.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
But I was gonna say there's no problems here. But yeah, she's fantastic here. It's a smaller part. She's one of the final replicants left towards the end of the film. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Brian James plays Leon Kowalski, another of the replicants. The first one we see on screen receiving the test, and then he kills his test giver and goes on the run. Especially during that scene where he's getting the test, he's a normal looking man, but like in his eyes, he just looks strange, out of his depth. I don't know, like he's intently trying to understand this test and what the man wants out of him. He's trying to pass it, and then eventually he's like, all right, I'm just gonna blow him away because I'm clearly not passing this here. Just eerie, weird presence. He becomes like the right hand man for Roy for a few scenes before meeting his end. It's all about those eyes. Those wide eyes they leave an impression. R.I.P. to Brian James, passed away too young in 1999, but very memorable performance here.
I also remember him in The Fifth Element. He plays Bruce Willis's like military superior that shows up. He's one of the guys that gets stuffed in the freezer or the fridge later in the film when he's trying to hide everybody. But very funny role there as opposed to the kind of serious, kind of dangerous role he's playing here. But like I said, it's a great performance. He kicks the film off essentially by being in this Voight comp test that kind of starts the film and then sets the tone for what's to come. When he, like I said, takes a kind of gets, he's like, I've had enough of your questions, just blows the guy away. Which is what leads to Deckard getting involved here. So hugely functional or hugely important for the plot itself, but also just giving a really great, again, just kind of slightly off performance where like it's like 98% normal, but there's just that 2% that's like slightly off, and it's all you need, and he runs with it.
Joanna Cassidy plays Zora, another replicant, and it's kind of funny to me. Like the other three replicants are like on a mission, trying to find a place to stay, working on living longer. She has a job already. Like presumably they all like arrived on Earth at the same time, and she just immediately found work as an exotic dancer. Really one big scene. Deckard meets up with her backstage. Harrison Ford acting his ass off as a reporter, getting a whole different voice, and she's on to him, and she doesn't play her cards until the very end of that scene where she throws him to the ground and makes a run for it out in the rain. Very
Yeah.
dramatic death. This is the first replicant we see retired on screen by Deckard. And it's just that, like, we see her fall through these panes of glass in slow motion, and it's clearly emotional. Like, they put a lot of emotion on her dying because Deckard is feeling something. He even says that he thinks of Rachel as he kills her. And it's kind of implied from the beginning of this movie that he did his job because it was his job, but wasn't happy about it. It's just work. But clearly it's taking a greater emotional toll on him now as this character has grown and he's met Rachel and these androids have evolved and he's just feeling differently about it. So it's not exactly an easy thing for him to do, but he does it nonetheless. So important role to play in the story of Deckard and his evolution. But again, that scene backstage, really well played. I mean, she's a convincing human, which is what these things are supposed to be before she makes a run for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be that this is just something to make some money in the meantime. I don't know what the deal is, but yeah, this scene, like I said, just one major scene. I think it starts that there were 6 replicants, and I know one died when they tried to infiltrate the Tyrell Corporation, and there were 4 left. I don't know where the other mystery 5th one is. Maybe it also got retired before, but so we've got the 4. We've got Batty, we've got Chris, we've got Leon, and we've got Zora. And this is, like you said, a pretty brutal death. It's one of the first ones we see Deckard do. And she does it perfectly. I was watching this movie and I'm seeing her face and I'm like, I know her from something and I can't remember what it is. And it's Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, where she plays Christina Applegate's boss. And I was just like, wow, what a career.
I have
what
two
a range.
2 movies in my notes here. It's Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, a movie I can't tell you how many times I watched this as a kid.
Oh, unbelievable. Yeah.
I have not revisited it, but it has a cult following from when I'm reading about it, so I need to go back and watch it. Also, Ghost of Mars. She's an alum of the show. I don't remember if we talked about her character. I think we did. But
I probably talked about
Blade Runner.
Ghost. Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead at the time.
Oh, right.
But anyway, yeah, she's great here. She's doing exactly what needs to be done. I did revisit. I actually go back to Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead decently because it's.
Do you watch it once a year, just like Blade Runner? You do a double feature of Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead and Blade Runner.
Get my Johanna Cassidy fix. No, I actually saw it once. I went to Alamo. They had Keith Coogan there, and they were watching this, so I saw it with him. That was pretty rad. Dishes are done, man, but it is. Yeah, that's just what a career. So many different things to do. Blade Runner, followed by Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, and then followed by a movie not as good as Blade Runner. But get to Mars in that one, I guess. But this scene, like I said, this stuff is really, really good. I like it a lot. And then the death in particular is very brutal. It's kind of shows the kind of nature of the job that Deckard is struggling with so much, and why he's kind of against it. But it works. It's all great. It's powerful and it's effective.
Now that brings me to a character that I also love. This movie, it turns out, Andrew, full of great performances. William Sanderson plays J.F. Sebastian. I feel so bad for this guy. Like, from the first scene, he's clearly sad and lonely and just has his creations to keep him company, and he's suffering from this ailment. And he's so happy to meet Daryl Hannah's character, just to have someone like to pay attention to him. And I don't even know if he himself is feeling like this is leading to something romantic. He just likes that he has attention to someone to talk to and someone that seems interested in him. But still, she stays the night, and the next day, Roy shows up, who's just this towering, handsome man, and he kisses her right in front of him, and he just sheepishly goes off to make them breakfast. Like, it's so heartbreaking. This character is so heartbreaking because it's so clear to us that he's being manipulated by these 2 replicants. And then, they force him to take Roy to meet Tyrell. And when Tyrell gets killed, he realizes like what he's responsible for and what's happened. And it's just a heartbreaking performance. it's great. It's really well done, and his voice is very familiar to me. Andrew, this is fun. He voices a character named Carl Rossum in Batman the Animated Series. Now that character creates an AI called Hardak. Hardak creates perfect robot replicas of real people. Commissioner Gordon, Bruce Wayne. It's a very fun episode. I think he appears in 2 or 3 episodes. But the connection there is obvious. Like the casting of a prominent character from Blade Runner to someone who creates robot replicas in Batman the miniseries. Very fun casting, but this guy's voice is burned into my brain because of that. So that's fun. That's really fun.
Yeah, that is fun. That is the definition of a fun fact. Yeah, this is another great performance. The way the replicants kind of just straight manipulate him into kind of getting what they want and then just killing him. You're killing him off screen, no less. Like you don't even see him die. Like makes it even sadder in a lot of ways. But just such a tragic character. But they empathize with him by kind of going through that. Like he kind of suffers from an actual genetic condition that's going to make his life immensely shorter. He says he's 25, and I was like, life's been rough, man.
Yeah.
I looked up how old the actor was. He was in his 30s, though. I was like, we're not going too hard. But it is a great performance, understated. Again, hugely important to the plot. Serves an exact purpose as far as getting Batty to Tyrell, and it's just great.
And finally, we have Joe Turkel playing Eldon Tyrell, the creator of these Nexus replicants. Now, Andrew, as much as the voice narration in this theatrical cut really puts a fine point on everything, it turns subtext into text. I think there's a lot of subtleties happening with this character that isn't said out loud that I love. He clearly sees himself as a god. He's creating life. I think there's a lot said. The fact that he lives in this corporation at the place like literally where he works, he has this bedroom that it seems like he never leaves this building. And the bedroom itself is very gaudy, very almost like Egyptian royalty, these 4-post bed and golden stuff everywhere and this fancy chess set. Like it says so much about how this man thinks of himself. And again, we don't get a voiceover of Deckard being like, clearly he thought very highly of himself as someone who creates life. Like it's never said, and I appreciate that. It's just an interesting character. I love how much is said about this character through the visuals, through the unsaid, through the set dressing, through his ridiculous glasses. Like it's great. I love what they're saying here.
Even building to that scene with Batty, where like Batty kisses him, like all of that is just like putting this character's the subtext on full display with just how these characters, how the replicants view him, how he views them, all of that. It's just very well done. It is not the last time this month we'll be talking about Joe Turkel, but more on that later. But this is a great character. Obviously, Niander Wallace from 2049 is the Jared Leto version of this character. It's the nicest way I can say that. Playing with a lot of the same themes, but those all start here. It's this extravagant lifestyle, but like you said, he lives in the place seemingly that he works. To him, it's just one existence that's wrapped up in this idea that he has created life, and he views these things as the next steps, as evidenced by Rachel being this kind of next stage, even beyond the Nexus 6 of a replicant that is, by all indications, largely indistinguishable from human. The replicants were already getting there, and it shows that there is an additional step beyond that he's already done that makes that distinction even thinner. And as that distinction gets thinner and thinner and thinner, at what point is there no longer a distinction?
The world of this movie is so interesting because we have this opening text that tells us like replicants are illegal. I assume they mean on Earth because we're still creating them and using them as slave labor on other planets, so that's okay. but we're also allowing this guy to create more and more advanced replicants. Like creating someone like Rachel has nothing to do with using these replicants as slave labor. Like that is just because he can, because he's pushing his work as far as he can. And it's like the laws are trying to catch up to the technology.
Yeah.
Which is
a thing that modern society is not dealing with at all.
100%. I mean, yes. You know, we are approaching this kind of stuff with like AI. And
approaching. Chris, it's here.
Well, I mean, there's not the laws are going to be reactionary to the capabilities of AI, and you know, I mean, you could apply to laws catching up to technology to tons of stuff throughout history.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And this movie is saying that it will continue to be a problem. I mean, this okay, we've talked about the cast. We're gonna start transitioning in the scenes, but this movie, I think one reason it had a hard time with critics upon release is that it is essentially inventing a new genre of tech noir. Now, obviously, that's like an offshoot of things that exist, like science fiction and noir, but this is one of, not the first time, we see this future society that is not utopian, it's not clean, it is very much based in like, where is our society heading? It's quote unquote realistic, or you could look at it as pessimistic, because there's clearly a lot of issues. We have all this crazy technology, but these giant ads, constant billboards, this dirty slums, we still have ghettos. It is a much bleaker view of the future than we typically see. And like I said, this is among the first time we've seen that. Like Star Wars gets a lot of credit for being this like dirty sci-fi, even though, you know, the movies say they take place in the past. We can't help but think of like space as the future, but we see these like rusted ships and this technology that is unimpressive to the characters in that universe. This is like taking that in a, again, darker direction and applying it directly to our society. Our society evolves into this society, not Star Wars, which is explicitly a different galaxy. So by being the first, you know, I love this phrase, the first through the wall gets the bloody nose. I think that's part of what we're seeing here. It's part of what we saw with The Thing. Like, it was doing something that was hard to wrap your head around at the time because of the originality, because of how new it was. And so I think a lot of that can be applied here. Like, this is creating this new genre. Like, you know, cyberpunk kind of evolves from this tech noir. Yeah. You know, Terminator lives in this world a few years later, but it's in a lot of ways the first of its kind.
It is certainly. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the first kind of like dystopic future with like a layer of grime over it. You've got something like Soylent Green, which comes out in the early 70s, which is probably something that also kind of lives in that idea. I mean, literally the plot of Soylent Green is, you know, the greenhouse effect and everything basically killed the planet, and we're all trying to deal with that to the point that everybody's given a resource to sustain themselves off of. And I don't know if you all know what the twist of Soylent Green is, but I won't spoil it here just in case. But
I think we've talked about this exact thing before. I feel like that's a movie where the twist is more famous than the movie itself.
Yeah, for good reason. It's a movie all about how humanity destroys the planet, and it stars noted ecologist Charlton Heston. But that's a joke, folks. It is a movie that I think is taking that kind of bleaker look, but you add in this tremendous visual sense that's kind of realizing the world in a way that we've never seen before. And not just realizing it, but it looks good and arguably still holds up. Like watching this movie back, I'm never taken out of it. I'm never feel like I'm not seeing a fully realized product. It's not one of those things where you look at old CG and you're kind of like, we weren't quite there yet, were we? Here, we're there, and it looks great.
Even like The Thing, I think also holds up, but also shows its age. There's like stop motion effects and stuff that pop and stand out. Like I appreciate it, but it looks of its time. This is even more timeless. It's
way ahead of its time, and so it's interesting to kind of take that, because you do have a lot of movies that are kind of like Logan's Run, which is a little bit before this, but it's this polished world, but behind the polish, there's the grime. Like, with Logan's Run, you're basically finding out that they're just shipping people off to die. Sorry, I will I won't spoil Soylent Green. I will spoil Logan's Run, apparently. But you've got that kind of sheen of kind of cleanliness over the top with the kind of dirt underneath, and that's pretty common in sci-fi, not just in film but in fiction as well. That's that's the foundation of almost everything, probably also including Foundation. But it's by taking that idea, though, that by putting the grime on full display, which something like Soylent Green does do, but mixing in this visual sense and the technology sense and the future aspects of it, you create this very unique combination that, like you said, essentially births a whole new genre. And it really can't be understated how much modern stuff is still being influenced by Blade Runner, basically. And we haven't even talked about the score yet. Like,
we haven't. We're getting ahead of ourselves, though, because the first thing we're supposed to do here is talk about our favorite scene of the film.
Yes.
So, Andrew, you're going to start us off here. When is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Blade Runner?
It's Roy Batty's speech. It has to build.
It has to be.
There's no question. It's the build to this I like a lot. Like I said, I mentioned that this kind of movie is not a classic action like adventure film. It's kind of like a deep. It's not even really a mystery. Like, it's kind of just a straightforward, like, there's a mystery in the sense that, all stories are technically mysteries because you don't know how they end. But there's this investigation that goes on, and there's, the kind of, you're given access to new information that changes certain aspects, but it's not really like Deckard is trying to, like, solve a murder. Like, he knows who these people are, and he's just trying to find them. And it builds to this final scene where first he fights Priss, and then he has this extended kind of cat and mouse chase with Batty, where Batty originally makes it very clear to him that, like, this is over. Like, Batty's toying with him.
100%.
Like, Batty is like, the minute I get my hands on you, it's done. Like, you will not survive this. Like, and Deckard knows that, and he's trying to run for his life, which if he were a replicant, he would not have. He would have been able to physically oppose Batty, and he was not able to do that at all. But anyway, I'm sure there's a Deckard's a replicant people that have an explanation for that. Probably the argument will be that Deckard is like Rachel; he's an advanced replicant. I don't care. I would say that's mean, and I don't care, but I really don't care. Anyway, this builds to the scene. They get to the roof where they're kind of the classic rain, and then, but while they're going through this cat and mouse chase, Batty knows that it's coming for him. He knows it's over. He's faced Tyrell already, and he knows that there's no saving him, which is why he kills Tyrell. But we'll talk about that scene more in a bit, I'm sure. But at this point, Deckard is running from him. He's just trying to survive at this point. He knows he can't fight him. He knows he's trying to survive. He doesn't have his gun. Jumps across a roof, barely hanging on, is about to fall. And Batty, knowing the end is coming, saves him. And he gives him this speech. And I won't recite it, word for word, but it is a fantastic scene.
Don't worry, Andrew. I will. He says, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. Time to die." Beautiful.
Cool.
You know what?
Here's the thing. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say before you were about to praise my reciting of it, I know. What I was going to say is I love that this is one of the most famous scenes, one of the speeches in sci-fi or in film, but it is very sci-fi. Like in the middle of that,
right?
Attack ship
what the
on
hell
fire
is the Tannhauser Gate? Like,
what are sea beams glittering? Yeah, but like the emotion is so strong that like it transcends the genre. Someone reflecting on what is being lost at the end of their life is so powerful. It is. It's so well done, and it's delivered perfectly. Like I swear, when it cuts to the shot of him reciting this, the movie like looks, it just glow, like it's just, you know, you're watching someone at the absolute top of their craft. It is so perfect. It's a perfect moment in film. It's incredible.
It's creating a sense of imagery. Like, you don't know what an attack ship on fire off the shoulder of Orion is, but you're sensing, the shoulder of Orion, that's a constellation. Spaceships on fire next to constellations, next to giant stars. Sea beams glittering in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. You're not seeing, but you're seeing this particle beam of light through space near this gate. It's creating this sense of scale. It's creating this sense of wonder almost. It's this idea that the things he's seen, because the only ones who saw it were replicants, all going to be lost. It's not just himself that he's talking about here either. It's all of them. Basically, every single thing of scale, of size, of epicness, of wonder, whatever that they've seen being used as disposable labor for humanity, dust in the wind. And someone should write a song called that. But it's there, and that's what's always hit me about it, is Batty is talking about just himself, but he's also not just talking about himself. He's talking about the problem, which is that you've created this group of people who can think for themselves and remember these things of wonder, these truly wondrous things throughout space, and none of it gets to get held on to. All of it's gone. And there's a deep tragedy to that. There's a deep, deep sadness. And while the man has done some bad things, who wouldn't be driven by knowing that their life is about to end and thinking there might be a way to stop it?
Yes, perfectly said, Andrew. What makes this scene so powerful is what precedes it, the cat and mouse chase. And so I'm glad we're highlighting that. My favorite scene in the movie as well, in case it's not obvious. But I love the movie is presenting him as the ultimate bad guy, as a villain. You see him do bad things. You see him killing people. He kills Tyrell brutally. And so you're like, oh, well, this is a bad guy. I hope Deckard beats him. And that continues when they meet in this decrepit building. And as you said, he's immediately just toying with him. He's like, I'll give you a head start. And he starts counting and taunting him. And he drives a nail through his hand. I mean, we're watching this thinking, well, he's psychotic. He realizes he can't live longer. He is just a psycho, going to brutally murder Deckard, going to play with him first. And that's our read on this character until he saves Deckard. That doesn't fit with what we've just been seeing. And then he poignantly says, quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. In his final moments, he's using it to taunt Deckard, to teach him a lesson, to relay his life experience to this man. And as he's toying with him, he has some lines that are kind of cluing you into this. Like Deckard tries to escape by scaling the side of the building, leaving himself quite vulnerable. And Roy says, that was irrational of you, not to mention unsportsmanlike. Like, in your desperation, you are nothing but a human. Like, I'm so clearly superior to you. And to the point where Deckard's on the brink of death, before he saves him, he says, now you know what it's like. He recites the speech we talked about already, and then dies. He did not go psychotic. He did not lose his mind. He did not lose control.
Nothing went wrong.
He used the last moments of his life to finish this arc that Deckard has been on, where he sees replicants differently. He sees them as a unique form of life that's not below human. They should have rights. They deserve to live. He's in love with the one. Like, it completes his story. It is perfect. It's so well done. It is just a perfect end to this film. Hashtag PP, but And under the theatrical version, which is what we're talking about, right after that poignant scene, a narration starts where he says, I don't know why he saved my life. And he comments on
Because first
all
off,
this stuff.
you know exactly why he saved your life.
Yes,
That's the
yes.
problem. It's like he saved your life because he was trying to make a point in his final moments that, like, you know, at this point, and then there's even the question of, like, was Batty ever going to actually kill him? Like, you can sort of ask that question of, Batty knows the end is coming. Does he know it's coming this soon? I don't know, but you could present the idea that Batty knew he was going to die. And so Batty was just like, I'm going to show him what it's like to live in fear before I'm done with. And
That's
you know,
that's
some of the
how I
lines-
read it. Yeah.
And you could see some of his lines and kind of be like, nah, he definitely, you know, Pris is dead, and you could take that personally and be like, okay, I may be about to die, but I'm going to punish Deckard before I do, which is also completely valid. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what his response is. It's all emotionally charged responses in response to what he is feeling. And it's all showing depth to these characters. And man, it is just so unbelievably good, and just speaks to this, to the story of this film, to the themes of this film, and to what it's about. And yeah, it's one of those things that's iconic for a reason. And yeah, there's really not much else to say there. It is one of those things that is iconic, and the reason it is iconic is completely, utterly valid. Rutger Hauer just absolutely crushes this. He brings the entirety of the character he's playing full circle. He brings the entirety of the story being presented in the whole movie full circle, and he crushes it.
100%. 100%. It's I watched the scene and I'm like, you know, I love what Sean Young is doing, but this is just undeniable.
It's another level.
And this is
It's another level.
It is in the true spirit of the Mark Strong Award. His performance is elevating the film. Like, it's been a cool sci-fi movie. This takes it to another level. And I like, we have an epilogue of sorts here where the mysterious Edward James Olmos shows up, and he gives this mysterious line. He calls out to Deckard and says, "It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?" And Deckard immediately rushes to his apartment because did Edward James almost kill Rachel? She was wanted. He's a Blade Runner. He says it's too bad she won't live. Like, it sounds like almost ominous and threatening. He gets there. Rachel's still alive, and they're going to make a run for it. On their way out, they see a little origami unicorn, which in this version of the film, all that means is that Edward James Olmos was there. He had the opportunity to kill Rachel, and he does not do it. He shows some compassion and humanity. He knows how Deckard feels, and he's going to let them have an attempt to live a life together. It continues like this perfect wrap up. Like, I really like that.
Yeah, I also am a big fan of just, it's, and when he sits there, he's like, it's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? I was just like, he's talking to every millennial on the planet at this point there, Edward James almost, but because who does live these days? But it is it's good.
And then, of course, the voiceover says, Gaff had been there and let her live. It's like, yeah, we know. That's what the origami is. We know. But, Andrew, you can correct me if I'm...
Okay, sorry. I need to say something about these voiceovers right now. So the whole reason and the whole justification for the voiceovers is that the argument was that the things happening in the film were not clear enough on their own that they needed to be explained. Now, I'm not going to deny that there may be things, if you're watching a version of this movie, that are not super obvious, but I don't think the narration ever actually helps with any of those things. Instead, it repeats the, most non-subtle information portrayed in the last scene, like the origami at the door. There's only one person in this movie making origami. They show him doing it multiple times, and they show the origami outside his door, which means he's been there. So what's the narration talk about? It doesn't talk about any of the heavier themes. It doesn't talk about any of the mysterious stuff. It goes, oh yeah, Gaff had been there. No kidding. Gaff had been there. It's literally been set up by the movie.
Hashtag PP.
I'm sorry.
Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. You're more familiar with different versions of this movie than I am. I believe future versions of this movie, there's a half-hearted director's cut where Ridley Scott had influence, and then, of course, the final cut where he has full control. Both of those versions add Deckard having a dream about a unicorn, which gives an additional significance to the origami. It implies that Edward James Olmos knew what he dreamed about, and the only way he would know that is if he was a replicant with false memories, and that's where that fuels the Deckard as a replicant argument. Am I reading this correctly?
Generally speaking, yes. The unicorn dream is one of the things that is held up as a possibility that Deckard's a replicant, but we're never given any information that, like, the daydream / dream, whatever it is something they're capable of throwing into replicants. Like, it's the unicorn symbolism is a little strange, but it's kind of one of those big question marks. And it is one of those things that I'm not the biggest fan of. Like, I get it, what we're going for, but yeah. So there, just to expand on that a little bit, there are 7 versions of this film, and folks, that's too many. There's just no reason for that. There's the original kind of work print prototype, which was like, just, guys, you know what a work print is. It's basically the first assembly, sometimes called an assembly cut. There was a San Diego sneak preview that same year that was shown once. It is almost identical to the theatrical version. It just has a couple of scenes that were not shown before and actually have not been seen since. The extra scenes that are in the San Diego sneak preview are in no other version of the film, not even the final cut. And if you look at the runtimes of all this stuff, they're almost all like minutes off. It's one of those things that's so weird. Then there's obviously the US theatrical release. There is an international theatrical release, which is 3 more kind of action sequences. It was internationally released, and then I think it was included on the Criterion Laserdisc. If you ever wanted to get into Laserdisc collections, guys, that's where the international release is. There's a broadcast version that was shown on television, 1986. And then we get the director's cut in 1992. Now, this is called a director's cut, but it's not really a director's cut. Basically, after the work print version of the movie got kind of released and was unauthorized or unofficially and was put into theaters unauthorized in 90 and 91, they were kind of like, fine, we'll do a director's cut. So Ridley Scott basically sent them a list of extensive notes of kind of what he wanted changed from the theatrical, but somebody else actually did it. So Ridley Scott didn't actually have control. He was basically able to advise, give his information, but he was not actually in the editing room and was not able to do that. So it's called a director's cut, but it's really not. It's essentially just like hey, we let the director give us some recommendations, and then we did this. And then ultimately, in the early 2000s, ultimately released in 2007, they finally get Ridley Scott to do his fully authorized, fully controlled, fully, uninterfered version of Blade Runner, and it is released as what is known as the final cut. This is the version that is largely seen by many as the definitive version. Basically, basically everything Ridley wanted to do is here. So that's your brief rundown of all the 7 different versions of Blade Runner.
And annually, I assume you are watching the final cut.
Annually, every other month, I watch one of them. So I work my way through. So I watch every version of Blade Runner once a year. I'm watching the final cut usually. That's the one that I do like. The unicorn sequence, I will admit, is a little strange. But I don't think it's the slam dunk Deckard's a replicant that people think it is. I think it's just symbolism. How do we know Gaff's not a replicant? That's what that could mean, guys.
How do you know anybody in this movie? You could just pick someone and be like, well, there's no definitive proof that they're not a replicant, so maybe they are. That's what drives me nuts about the theory.
I think your read of the movie makes a lot more. The movie is more interesting with a human falling in love with a replicant than it is with two replicants that didn't know they were replicants falling in love with each other. It seems odd. So anyway, that unicorn sequence is strange. I don't remember if it's in the. So the director's cut removes the voiceovers. It does add the unicorn. And then it gets rid of the quote unquote happy ending, which is them like driving away.
So what do you think of that? You watch the final cut, which is more ambiguous, right? They escape.
They leave. They escape, leave. But then it ends it there.
And as far as we know, all replicants being made have a 4-year lifespan. We would assume that includes Rachel. And so, Gaff's words to him, she doesn't have long to live. Who does? Or it's too bad she won't live. It's all left up in the air. Like, do they have months together? Do they have years? Is she going to live longer? Like, the movie hasn't really said explicitly she's different, but we know she is different, but is her lifespan different? Like, we don't know. Do you... I personally, I'm not... The narration is a lot. Like, the movie's better without narration, but I don't hate the idea of us being told that Tyrell said she doesn't have the 4-year lifespan. Like, that doesn't...
I don't remember.
I'm not upset about being happy for them at the end.
I'm trying to remember if they say potentially somewhere else in the film that she doesn't have the 4-year lifespan. For me, I like it because it kind of shows me that for Deckard, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He knows she's a replicant. It doesn't matter if it's 2 weeks, if it's 2 months, if it's 2 years, if it's 4 years. It doesn't matter to him. He's like, this is worth leaving all this behind to do this. And I think that speaks to the power of the relationship that's formed between the two of them, that it doesn't matter to him. It's worth doing. And what's more powerful than that?
It's the power of love, as I once read in the news.
I hate you.
Andrew,
that's how I feel about, like, I do watch the final cut. I need to watch it again. I'm due for my watch. But
I am so watching Final Cut and Blade Runner 2049. I'm so in this right now.
Yeah, it's a great presentation. I actually have the artwork that Drew Struzan did for the Final Cut. I have a nice screen print of that. Need to get that up on the wall. Turns out that Drew Struzan guy was just really good at making posters.
He's pretty good.
Pretty solid. But
Andrew, hashtag PP. I mean, we're praising this movie. It's an all-time classic. I just gotta say this: there are a few things that have aged worse in classic films than the male protagonist aggressively stopping his love interest from leaving and forcing them to confront their feelings that they have for them.
It's the sci-fi version of Baby It's Cold Outside. It's just really
so
not good.
Bad. It's so bad.
It's not, like that scene came up and I was just like, like, we're not talking Ace Ventura bad, but like
I had the same problem with Rocky. Like, Rocky, one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
The scene where he like stops Adrian from leaving and holds her, like, how I get how they
clearly can't oppose you. Like,
yes,
can't fight you. Like,
I get how they think this comes across as romantic. Like, oh, I know that you love me. I just need to show. Like, it's so bad. And
it is a thankfully largely relegated to the past trope.
Yeah,
that we have thankfully moved beyond.
But I assume it still exists in Final Cut and other versions. Like, there's like, it's just It's just one
of those things I kind of have to grapple with. It's and like the ideas that they both know how they feel, they're both just kind of running from it, and it's that thing where you're like, all right, okay, but like, there had to have been a better way. You didn't have to write it this way. Like,
Yes.
it's that same
Yes.
thing where it's like, it's the old Man of Steel. It's like, well, he didn't have a choice. It's like, no, you just didn't have to write him in that sequence. Like, you just don't have to write that.
Instead of writing your man character as being vulnerable and talking about how he feels, you have to make him aggressively force the woman to. It's all right.
It's not great,
PP.
folks. It's
Hashtag-
not great.
Yep.
That's
Andrew,
really
there's two questions I have here that I did not Google. I'm just gonna go to you for the information here, Andrew.
all right. See if I care.
As much as I've watched this movie and researched and stuff, I don't know why they're called Blade Runners. Do you?
I don't know either.
To me, it's just there's no, like, we get a slang term for the up against, a skin bag or something. That doesn't clue me into anything. Like, blade, like, I don't, like, what? It's like no bearing on anything else in the story. Like, it could be like, and they called us mushroom froggers because we hunted down replicants. And it's like, okay, yeah, two random words. Why are they Blade Runners? Like, runner, I think of like smuggler. Like, I don't even think of it as like killers. So I don't get it.
Yeah, apparently within the context of this movie, they just thought it sounded cool.
Okay. Hey, you know what?
Like, there's
enough.
some bits here. There's some bits here that, like, there was a science fiction story by Alan Norse where kind of there was a black market for surgical procedures, and the guys getting the medical equipment would be called Blade Runners, similar to drug runners. They'd be going to get like scalpels and surgical equipment. So in the story, they're called Blade Runners, just like I said, like drug runners. And that's where the kind of idea, the kind of phrasing of Blade Runner comes from. But within the context of this movie, they were just like, sounds like a cool thing to call a detective in a sci-fi future. And they were correct.
It is cool, I guess. Okay. Here's the other thing I didn't Google. The man they tracked down that created the snake who ultimately leads them to JF.
Yes.
There's no way Babu Frick is not based on this guy. He's got the long, stringy Fu Manchu. He's got the goggles pushed up on his forehead that look just like Babu Frick's. I am convinced Babu Frick was modeled after this guy.
You mean Hannibal Chew, not Taffy Lewis, right?
The
James
one in
Hong?
the freezer? The one in the freezer?
Yeah, that he's the eyes guy. He's not the snake guy.
I'm sorry. You're right. The eyes guy. Yeah.
Hannibal Chew. Yeah, I would. If you
that's
asked, I would 100% believe that Babu Frick was based off of Hannibal Chew. James Hong, by the way, we didn't talk about him because he's only in the one scene. But James Hong, always wonderful, always fantastic. Whether it's this, Big Trouble in Little China, he's great. Wayne's World 2, exceptional actor. Still with us, 94. And he's great in that scene, being terrified by a bunch of killer robots. But sorry, robots with a very real fear about being extinguished. But yeah, if you told me Babu Frick was based off of Hannibal Chew, I would 100% believe it. There's at least some influence there. There has to be.
100%. Andrew, I have totally come around on this movie, clicked with it, vibed with it. I love it. It's a classic. I finally submitted and let myself be part of the praise of this movie.
Run with the blades, man.
It's very good. I fully came around in this rewatch of the theatrical version, which we've clowned on the narration a lot, like it is a problem, but honestly, I think it is my one issue with the version of this movie. I think everything else works. I think the movie works despite the voiceover, because you got to think, like, the movie's legacy grew based on this version of the movie. Like, this version of the movie is what initially garnered fans in relooks and stuff. We don't get that final cut until 2007, and I know, like, they took out the voice narration for some of the other versions we talked about that did eventually circulate on home video, but it is still this presentation that garners the initial, gets the ball rolling for the resurgence of this movie. And honestly, yeah, it's the one thing Like if you had a Virgins movie that was just this exactly without that voiceover narration, boom, 5 stars, classic. Everything I had to praise about this movie is all here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good. I mean, the director's cut is 92, so I mean that's a good 10 years of just Blade Runner existing as Blade Runner, and then the director's cut's 92, and that the big, you know, it's only got the 3 major changes. It's the voiceovers are taken out, the unicorn sequence is added in, and they kind of
which does not enhance the movie for me. #PP. Adding the unicorn doesn't make the movie better, in my opinion.
I don't think it necessarily makes it worse either. It's more of a lateral change. That's just something Ridley wanted. It was something he shot, wanted to put in, and were nice enough for the director's cut. He didn't get to supervise to put it in for him. But
he shot a unicorn?
Yeah, with a gun. The last one. It was a real uproar. No, anyway.
They call us Blade Runners. We hunt down unicorns.
Wouldn't you be horn runners then? Don't question it. So that's all it does is get rid of the voiceovers, adds the unicorn, and then it just cuts it at them running away from his apartment. It leaves it there.
Yeah.
And so the director's cut for the longest time was but it's the 2 big things of the voiceovers and the studio imposed kind of make sure we know they're going to be happy. And then the unicorn sequence is added in, which I think the idea was that, like you said, it's implying some things, but I don't know how well it does it. Now, Blade Runner 2049 does expand on Sean Young's character a little bit by implying that seemingly she did live for a while. It doesn't give us anything exact, but it does give us some more information in that regard. Obviously, her character, while only being semi-present within the film, it's more of a presence that's felt because obviously the child of the replicant that is kind of the kind of core of that film is her child. Like that's what it is. It's at least the implication. So Blade Runner 2049, best sequel of all time.
Whoa. Best legacy sequel, I'll give it to you.
What's the best sequel?
Terminator 2.
All right, fine. I guess.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's in the running. I mean, like Terminator 2, sure. Blade Runner 2049, Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick is the best jump in quality from 1 to 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I can't think of. Terminator 2 is a great example. Don't misunderstand me. Godfather 2, obviously, still, but just. I would say, okay, I'll accept the best legacy sequel of all time because just taking that story of Blade Runner and finding, because the whole premise of Blade Runner is are replicants, basically, do replicants deserve to be seen as autonomous life? Basically, the idea of do we want to acknowledge the humanity of replicants? And the story of 2049 being replicants being able to reproduce, I think is like the perfect escalation of that concept into essentially making their humanity undeniable, but still people wanting to make it undeniable. I can't think of many other instances where you took a concept and so naturally progressed it so much later and managed to bring back original characters in a way that didn't feel super forced. They weaved them all into the story or very naturally. Like Harrison Ford is used perfectly in Blade Runner 2049. It should stand as a testament to if you want to do a legacy sequel with legacy characters, literally use that as your guide. You've got Edward James Olmos in the one kind of investigation scene, which is perfect. It's another tie, just a small thing to be like, hey, we've got some more links there, but that how they use Harrison Ford is perfect. But taking that concept of this, escalating it so naturally to the next, what I think is logical point, and just exploring that story in depth, creating the tension that they do, the idea that Ryan Gosling thinks that he may be the replicant child, and then finding out that he's not because of the implanted memories, bringing back the idea of the implanted memories and things like that, despite the fact that replicants have evolved. Evolving the Blade Runner job to be replicants now hunting for other replicants, which again doesn't make any sense as it being a change if it was always like that. Get me? Moving on. So yeah, I love these movies. They're absolutely fantastic. This was the perfectly, yeah, like, you know, you kind of are like there was like the heave ho of like the sigh of like, oh, I guess I got to watch the theatrical. The plot's the same. It's there's the voiceovers are bad, but I think I even told you before we recorded, like, by and large, when they start, my brain just kind of is like, look at the pretty visuals. Like I just kind of move on. But I love this movie. I love what it's done. Obviously, this is a movie that's inspired things in the ensuing 42 years immensely. I do like everything that we've gotten. They did do an anime set in the gap, because that's actually what's really interesting is, you know, 2049 takes place 30 years after this one, which takes place in 2019. So there's all these gaps, and it is so they've done some media that's expanded on some of that, and I always think that stuff's really, really cool as well when you've built out the story and you actually get a chance to explore it a little bit. As far as whether or not there'll be another movie, I don't need there to be. I'm happy with what we got. But if there is going to be something, I hope it gets the attention and care that these first two films did.
I agree. And before we get out of here, I would be remiss if I didn't mention friend of the show's favorite line of this movie. It is after Rachel realizes she is a replicant, reflecting on it. She says, "I'm not in the business. I am the business." Which is both tender, sad, and kind of badass.
That is a great line, but it reminded me of one of my favorite exchanges in the film. So I was thinking about any other lines in the film that I thought of, and it's when Leon confronts Deckard, and he grabs him and he says, "How long do I have to live?" And Deckard punches him, and then looks at him and goes, "I don't know." I'm just.
Yeah, that's also good. Also a powerful line in this movie, Andrew.
It's extremely powerful, though, but just the notion that, like, he punches him first, and then when he sees that wasn't effective, then says, "I don't know," like, that's gonna somehow be better for him. Anyway, Rachel's line, which I want to come back to, is another one of my favorite moments, and it lends to, like, when you're arguing for, like, her being a Mark Strong of the first half of this film. It's stuff like that works so well. Sorry, I had to get the dumb thing out so I can have the real conversation now. But I love that bit. Like you said, it's another multi-layered statement where, you know, she's finding out I'm a replicant. I'm essentially, you know, quote unquote, part of the problem. Which is the other thing that all these replicants are dealing with. They are living in a time that is essentially willingly dehumanized them. You know, all they are is things, but these things have thoughts, they have feelings, they have things like that idea at the beginning that, like, it's always been thought that they could start having emotions, and it's like, well, what are you gonna? And then they don't do anything about it. It's like, cool. It's another instance where, like, we don't grapple with the you know, we do a thing and then we don't want to think about the consequences of it. We don't want to think about it any deeper. We don't want to actually have to grapple with the consequences of what we've done. We just want to focus on that one part and be like, that's it. That's all we've done. We're fine. It's like, oh, well, that's causing this. I don't want to think about that. And it's interesting because Blade Runner itself, you know, like you said, it has all these kind of conversations that have spun out of it. Some stuff that's come out of, you know, with authorial intent. But it is a great movie with lots of themes and lots of settings, and everybody is working to bring those things together. And that sequence by Sean Young is definitely, it's small, it's quick, it's powerful, and it says a lot with just a few lines.
Andrew, I'm starting to feel like a broken record here where I say, like, these movies we're covering this month, I didn't quite click with them, and then we revisit them and I go, oh, okay, that's why it's a classic film. Because that has kind of been the theme all month so far. However, next week we're talking about The Shining, and I think for me this is going to be the biggest hurdle challenge. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna finally click with this movie because I feel like I've seen it relatively recently and I've read a lot about it and studied it. I don't know. We'll see. honestly, I think I've only watched it beginning to end once. So maybe another viewing is gonna change my mind. But regardless, I'll be here talking about what I do like and the positives. But I don't know. We'll just have to see. What are your thoughts on The Shining? Are you like 100% there? It's a horror classic, or do you have your own reservations?
I didn't know what Chris wanted me to say here. I wasn't sure if he was asking me to give my actual thoughts or if he wanted me to save it for next week's episode. It's one of those things where I have to separate the art from the adaptation. Because, like, I do love the book a lot, but the book is a very different beast, and that's obviously a thing we'll talk about more next week. So when I watch the movie, I have reservations, not so much with the final product. I think the final product speaks for itself largely. I can understand why it doesn't land for some people, but, like, knowing how Stephen King feels about it as an adaptation, knowing what we know about, like, Shelley Duvall's treatment on the set by Stanley Kubrick, stuff like that. It is not a movie that I revisit very often. And it's
maybe every 2 years.
Yeah, and then I watch all 6 versions of it. No. I have mixed feelings with it. I have not revisited it in some time. I think the last time I watched it was right around when Doctor Sleep was coming out. Which worth watching if you haven't seen it. But Mike Flanagan largely doesn't miss. But I have mixed feelings on The Shining. I think there's some. I think not enjoying it is completely valid. So I am interested to go back and check it out and kind of sit down with it, kind of really sit with it for the first time in a while to see where I sit with it. But definitely a complicated movie with a bit of a complicated legacy.
That is next week, wrapping up our technically month. But for now, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can just hop into our Discord. There's a link right there in the show notes. What are you waiting for? Come and join us. And you can leave a question, just like Mike Lynch, who says, I know we all get a dopamine hit when sharing obscure movie facts. We're all trying to hear the phrase, wow, really? I didn't know that. But is there a movie trivia fact you told so often that you decided to stop sharing it? I love this question. I love movie trivia. I love these little trivia facts. I love sharing them. So I get where it's coming from. But have I worn out the welcome on some of them?
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I think I wear out my welcome with everyone. But it's not just about movies. But no, I used to share. Liz would like send me like a meme of somebody that like you can't just watch a movie with me without me needing to share endless facts about it while we're watching it. And it's definitely something that I've actively like tried. I've reached a point where I've just tried to stop sharing facts. Like I try to like just not do it unless it kind of comes up in conversation.
Right.
I know I've shared a lot of facts about Ghostbusters, both whether it's a different cast, whether it was the processes, whether it was kind of different intentions for that film before it was ultimately realized. I kind of just started sitting back and watching it. Ghostbusters is probably the one I would talk about most heavily. I used to know an unbelievable amount about Kevin Smith movies. That was another one I stopped sharing, mostly because I didn't want people to associate me with Kevin Smith movies. But it's it did remind me though. Last night I saw a gentleman named Glenn Hughes perform music. He was in Deep Purple for a while after they did all the famous stuff. But I love the albums that he did with Deep Purple, and they're some of my favorites. And so he's touring those, playing some of those songs. But I was sitting in like the venue had this like pizza place attached to it, legitimately. And so I was kind of sitting there just eating like a snack before the show because I went and I met him too. Like I went to the meet and greet. And sitting in that, so I'm sitting in this like pizza parlor type thing, and I'm at the bar facing out the windows, and I'm just listening to all these middle-aged metal/hard rock fans, and all it is people sharing weird obscure facts. It's the entire group is just endlessly people like, well, did you know Glenn played those albums with Deep Purple? Have you listened to any of the other stuff he did? You know, he did those albums with Tony Iommi, and then he also had that album that was supposed to be a Tony Iommi album, but then it got changed due to a Black Sabbath album due to contractual obligations. Thing is, everybody in the room knows this.
Right.
You're not at a Glenn Hughes concert unless you know this, but everybody is still sharing it anyway. And I was just sitting there like,
it's not about teaching someone something. It's about letting everyone know that you know the thing.
Exactly. It's not about informing anyone. It's about making sure that everyone knows you know it. And for whether it's for your benefit or for theirs. It's like, I can't think these people are lame. I can't let these people think I'm lame and think that I don't know this. Like, because, you know, if you don't know that Glenn Hughes sang lead vocals on Seventh Star, everyone in the room is going to think lesser of you. That's genuinely how it seems to be. But in that room at that moment, I was like, that's why I don't come to these.
I don't know if there's one. I've retired. Like you, like I try not to volunteer too much that when someone isn't interested or didn't ask. I've tried to develop a little more tact with that. I like that. We mentioned Dumb and Dumber earlier, and one of the most famous scenes in the movie where Jim Carrey says, "You want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?" and says that really loud. That was improvised, and it made everyone break character. So if you watch the scene, he does it, and there's a cut like right when he finishes that sound because everyone busted out laughing. And you can kind of see them start to break, and so there's a fun fact for you. But as far as oversharing, this isn't movies, but Everclear is one of my favorite bands, and me and friend of the show, we just in general like going to see a lot of 90s bands because it's a smaller venue size, it's a cooler concert, there's a lot of meet and greet opportunities. It's like the right level of fame to see a band, and it's the era of music we grew up on, so we feel pretty passionately about it. So we've seen Everclear a few times, and we were at a show, and they played the song Strawberry, which is one of their best songs, and it is about the lead singer, Art Alexakis, who has been sober from heroin addiction for a long time, but had a dream that he had relapsed. And it is about that dream. It's about the feeling of just losing all this progress. And he woke up from the dream, went down and recorded the song like all in one take. And I shared that fact. They started playing it, and it's an older song of theirs. They don't play it every show, and so they started playing it. And I told friend of the show, my wife, we're at the concert, the quick story behind it. And she said, "Oh, they played this last time we saw them, huh?" And I realized, oh, I told her this exact story already. Like last time we were there and he played the song, I told her the background, and so I was like, very sheepishly, like, oh yeah, I guess they did.
Guess so.
I felt pretty dumb. So I felt like that guy being like, "Hey, I know this thing about the song." Yeah. Anyway,
I feel that a lot. My concern is as I meet new people, I lose the barometer of what I have and haven't told people.
Right.
Not just about things, but about myself. And so I'll be in a group and be like, "Yeah, it's like that time I went to Japan," and they'll be like, "You went to Japan?" And I'm like, "Oh, this group doesn't know that." Oh crap. Like it's like this trying to find the endlessly, like, I don't want to overshare, but now it's reaching the point where I'm like, does everyone just think I'm some mysterious weirdo who never talks about himself? I assume I've told everyone everything, but I've changed all my groups enough that now nobody knows anything. Ugh, the endless struggle.
Andrew, before we get out of here, Mike Lynch says at the end of this question that his trivia fact he's retired is Viggo's toe in Lord of the Rings. Andrew, I don't know what he's talking about. Is there a fun trivia fact about Viggo Mortensen's toe in Lord of the Rings?
Does he lose the toe?
That's my first thought, but I actually haven't heard this. So Mike Lynch, you've retired this fun fact, but I don't even know it. Andrew, I believe you're Googling right now.
I am. He broke his toe.
He broke his toe.
Yeah.
Well, I guess.
In the Two Towers, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are searching for blah, 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 been abducted, blah, 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 pile of burning orc body, blah, blah, blah.
That is exactly how I feel like the story of Lord of the Rings.
Aragorn kicks a helmet. So Aragorn kicks a helmet, and it's revealed that when he kicked the helmet, he broke his toe, and that his cry of apparent anguish at Merry and Pippin's supposed death was actually a cry of pain because he's an idiot. Got it.
Hey, that is a fun fact. Mike Lynch, unretire it. Start sharing it again.
Retire it now. Now
that's
that
a
we
good
know
one.
it, you can
Now
retire
that
it.
we know. Now that we know, we've broadcasted on our podcast. I guess you can retire it.
He's going to post, hey guys, I've posted this in the Discord before. Like, "Eee."
Join us next week. We're talking about The Shining, wrapping up this month. And remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for that SoundCloud link. And check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. Follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. The music fading out means the episode is over, but we often include outtakes and cut material after the credits of our episode. Here's one now. Let's talk about some more replicants, Anna.
Anna.
I mixed Andrew
Bro,
and
what?
Anna. Because I'm about to talk about Daryl Hannah.
Bro, what?
Yep, I called Andrew Anna. Pretty stupid. Here's an outtake from before the episode even began, when we were doing our mic check and syncing sound. Okay, let's count it up. 1,
2,
3,
4.
5.
Six.
Why'd you take a drink? All right, you know what?
I had a second. I had a whole second, Chris.
You see, Andrew had taken a drink of soda between counting 5 and 6. I wasn't sure he was going to be able to say 6 on time. I guess that one's more of a visual gag. Maybe not great for a podcast. But hey, that's why it's post-credits, right? Is it clear that these bits of narration throughout the episode was a reference to Blade Runner? You see, in the theatrical version of Blade Runner, there's unnecessary narration explaining the events you just saw. So I did it in this episode sort of like as a fun reference. Was it fun? Or was this too much? Was it too much narration? Is the vocal effect unnecessary? I was a little unsure. I tried it both ways, and ultimately I went with the vocal effect. But I hope it's clear what we were going for with this joke. Too late to change it now, I guess. Hopefully it reads. Hopefully everyone understands.